Good morning. I'm going to start off the presentation with some of the areas that we're responsible for. And some of them are not, you say, well, why is traffic involved in that? But it's kind of over the course of time. So anyway, we're going to talk about just strictly the 2013 design standards. We're just going to talk about the major updates. We're not going to talk about every change that's made. So you need to go back and look at the handout that was put out that's got all the changes in it. Of course, the 2013 standards will be effective in January of 2013. The first index I'd like to go into is 415, which is temporary barrier wall index. We've made some revisions in here, pretty substantial revisions on anchoring. The old anchoring that was in 415 were plates that were only tested by one manufacturer, and basically most of the other ones were anchored based on what that manufacturer had done. The new indexes show new anchoring for barrier wall when it's associated with a transition of a barrier wall at a crash cushion. We used a dot pattern on the barrier wall units to indicate the number and side on which the barrier wall is to be anchored. All of our barrier anchoring system that's now in the index uses a type K barrier, and the type K barrier should be used for all anchoring purposes. So if you've got a project that's got barrier wall in it, that's got a crash cushion, you need to remember that you're going to need a certain number of type K units are going to be required for the anchoring. Department has recently gone under a review of all of our temporary and permanent crash cushion vendor drawings. All of the vendor drawings are now compliant with this beginning of length and knee. Departure line is noted on all the crash cushions since the redirective point varies by vendor and manufacturer. So when you get out into the field and the contractor picks a barrier wall, it clearly indicates where that redirective point is. Another thing we've changed is the number of units which extends beyond the end of the hazard. It's been changed. The old standard had 2.5 units, and the new requirement is 8 units. The reason we chose 8 units is that most barrier wall was tested with 16 units and was impacted in the center. So we know that if we have half of that unit, that we can determine the specific deflection. We are planning on doing some testing on trailing ends to determine if we can reduce the number of units on the trailing end. The next revision is Index 801, which is our Type A fence. And the revision has been made to add additional materials that are acceptable for Type A fence. This note adds an additional fabric the fence now allows. We're now allowing the smaller gauge high tensile strength wire fabric. This has been on a bunch of jobs already. It's come up with subcontractors have proposed this fence, and we've allowed it on projects already as the no zero cost SA, but we now have it in our standard index. Even though it's a smaller gauge, the high tensile 170 watt KSI wire has a greater overall strength than the grade 60 wire that we previously used to have with our steel fence. The high tensile wire option has also been added to the barbed wire as well. This type 2B is a new option, and again it uses the high tensile wire in lieu of the grade 60 barbed wire. The next one is in Index 11860. We kind of went through some changes in 11860. If you're very familiar with this, when we first came out with the new 11860 in 2007, we had some offsets to the bolt holes, and if you remember, there were 5.5 inches. And we ended up finding out that the manufacturing process that punched these holes used a specific jig, and all these jigs were set up for an 8-inch bolting off the side. So we changed all of them shortly after the index came out. Now, one of the ones that we did not change was the yield sign. The bottom of the yield sign used to have an 11-inch offset from the point to the bottom bolt hole. And that was basically due to the shape. It gave us a little bit longer Z bracket or wind beam on the back of the sign. We found, though, in construction, some of these signs were being delivered. They were being delivered with a 6-inch offset. So we went back and changed this yield sign to show a 6-inch bolt hole offset on the bottom. When we change that, it does change the number of wind beams that are needed on a 36-inch sign. So in construction, if you're putting up any yield signs, you need to be particularly attuned to this change. The next thing I'd like to go through is we've used Design Bulletin 12-11 to introduce a new design standard for median barrier sign supports. All of our current single and multi-post sign columns or supports are crash-worthy devices. There are no crash-worthy devices for sign supports on median barrier. We've spent about almost 2 years looking at testing that was being done by other states and looking at other states to see if we could find a device that was crash-worthy. And we've been unable to find one. So we've gone ahead and introduced Index 11871. Now I want you to know 11871 is a rigid sign support, and due to its design should only be used for critical signs. It's not to be used for any sign you want to put in the median. And the Design Bulletin clearly spells out what permanent signs are allowed to be put on the support. Now, right now, we've kind of set up with traffic ops and several people to determine what these critical signs might be. And if you in the district find that have a need for what you feel is a critical sign that should be placed in the median and want it added to the list, contact me and we'll have to go through the PPM and change the list of critical signs that we are allowing. Now, the index has several anchoring plates or base plates designs, which is based on some of our current barrier wall. It says in here in the bottom table, it gives you which one of these base plates is to be used. There's also a base plate for temporary barrier wall. And temporary work zone signs can be placed on this support, but it's only to be used where there's insufficient space for ground-mounted sign supports. So if you've got an MOT situation where you don't have room to put ground-mounted signs, you can use 11871 as a median barrier support for work zone signs. The next change we have is in Index 17355. The size of the business entrance sign has been reduced. We started seeing some pictures on projects where the current sign of the old sign was 3 foot by 3 foot, and if you look at the work zone sign supports, that required a 2-column sign. And we were seeing multiple instances of where this sign was used with 2-column signs and several of them being used, and it really needed to be on a single column sign. So we've changed the sign size from 3 by 3 to a 3 by 2. Now, I agree with you, it kind of reduced the spacing between the letters and the space between the entrance and the arrow, but this sign looks a lot better on a single column sign. So this particular sign now is reduced for a single column sign. Another change is in our Index 17500, our conventional light pole. We've modified the grounding system. The previous grounding system used a ground rod. The ground was grounded in the pull box, and this new standard shows a separate ground for the pole that has its own separate ground rod. Another change in 17500 that also occurs in conventional light poles and high mast was a change to the expansion material between the pole foundation and the slab. The old standard required a hot poured elastic joint sealer, and what we found in construction was that most of them were used a polyethylene foam for the expansion material to pour around that, or to be used around that pole foundation. And then when you came back and put a hot pour sealant on top of it, it melted the foam, and you still weren't getting a good fully sealed joint. So we've changed the material requirements on this expansion material to require a foam expansion joint and a type A sealant, which is a cold joint sealant. So those are the major changes that we have in 17500. Zell's going to take over from here and talk about the changes to Index 600. But if you have any questions about the traffic standards or any of the ones I've talked about, please feel free to call me. Zell?
Thank you, Chester. This is Izal Bengozi. I do work in the criteria section, and just my responsibility is just the maintenance of traffic. We're going to be talking about the changes that's is going to be effective in January 1st to 2013. The first change is I did add a note about the side distance within the construction zone. That if we look at the note that you cannot restrict the side distance within the intersection. Apparently, we do have an issue with the contractor placing the equipment and stockpiled materials close to the intersection, and we had to add that note in there to make sure that they're not going to do it. And the second note is for the vest or the high visibility safety apparel. The year 2004 is still acceptable. If we look at the ANCI 2004 or 2010, both of them they're still acceptable, or they are acceptable. Another change we made is to the traffic. We made a change to the temporary lane separators. If you look at note number 5, we did add the note that the contractor has the option of using using the portable temporary lane separators instead of the asphalt, and we did create an item for it, or a pay item for it. It's 102-75. Another change is for the business signs. We did specify that both for the single business and the multi-business, they can use the 24-inch and the 24-inch by 36-inch sign, as Chester just said a minute ago. For a single business, you're going to have the business name and the logo, and for the multi-business, you're going to have just business entrance. Another thing is the PED LCD or PED channelizing devices. We did add note number 12 that we're required to use this on the sidewalks if you know that there is PED traffic, or if you do recognize that there is a PED traffic. This is a picture of it. The requirement is from the walkway, it's 2 inches to the bottom of the bottom rail, and maximum or minimum of just 8 inches from the walkway to the top of the bottom rail. And if you look at the top, it has to be a minimum the 32-inch. There is another type, which is the wall, which is the same criteria. The same criteria of the 2 inches from the walkway to the bottom of the wall, or if you look at the height, It should be a minimum of 32 inch. The note for number 11, which is the vehicle LCD, it says that you can use lower than the 32 inch, but you do have to supplement it with the tubular markers similar to Index 412, where you put the some kind of tubular markers with the reflective sheetings. So you can have a low profile LCD. This is a picture of the 32 inch or more vehicle LCD. This is North Miami Beach. You see it marks the entrance of the driveway. And this is for a note number 12. If you have a distance behind the wall, if it's less than 2 feet and the drop off it's more than 10 inches, you have to require of a 48-inch wall or a safety rail in a way that it can withstand the 200-pound load at the top of the device. They want to prevent, or we want to prevent the people from falling over into the drop-off. 660. This is we did add the note, or we changed it. If you look at this detail on the right-hand side, we did the PED LCD. We changed it from regular channelizing devices to PED LCD. If you look at it closer, the symbology has been changed. Design Bulletin 12-13 has been it's been issued in July 17th last month, and it does address the use of the crash cushions. It's been a hot topic. The contractors and the maintenance of traffic contractors, they've been calling us, should we use TL2 or TL3 for 70 miles per hour, and we did issue this bulletin so we can clarify the crash cushion. We did require the vendors to resubmit the drawings in a way that in the drawings the table will show the speed limits in the increments of 5 miles per hour, and then beyond 60 miles per hour you can use the TL3. For speeds less than 45 miles per hour, you're going to be using the TL2 devices, which is in turn a shorter device. The DOT criteria, it's TL2 for 45 miles per hour or less, and TL3 for 50 miles or greater. And the speeds you can interpolate, or the vendor, they can interpolate at 5 miles per increments. They're not allowed to extrapolate beyond 60 miles per hour. And this is it came from the FHWA that the vehicles, they tend to slow down before they hit the crash cushion. So they didn't need, or actually the research, it showed that vehicles, when they hit the crash cushions, they tend to slow down either by braking or trying to avoid the crash cushion. So they said, well, it's not cost effective to design a crash cushion for more than 62.5, which is in turn we went with 60 miles per hour. The designer, he's going to be showing the this to the, I guess, for the contractor use, or this table, or the summary of temporary the crash cushion. It's going to be the similar one for the permanent, but at this moment we're going to be talking about the temporary crash cushion in a way that the designer, he's going to be showing the MOT phase, the station, the offset, the site, and then the speed of the work zone, and if it's TL2 or TL3 or the test level. And they're going to be talking about showing the width of the hazard, and most likely it's going to be the 24-inch for the barrier wall. And then if there is any length restrictions, in this case, if you have a median openings that you cannot install the crash cushion, and they have to indicate if there is restriction in length or not. For example, on phase 2 over here, we show a restriction of 14 feet. So the contractor, he has to go to the QPL, and he or she has to pick up a crash cushion that's 14 feet or less in this case. And then the way we're going to pay for it is, if you look at the flow chart, we do have the start and then the type. If it's temporary or permanent. If it's temporary, if it's capacity, the project or not. What I mean by capacity, or what we mean by capacity, if you're adding capacity to the roadway in a way that you're adding lanes, you are increasing the capacity of the roadway. If it's no, you're going to be using pay item 10289-7. If it's yes, is the quantity less than 50, or if it's more than 50. If it's greater than 50, you're going to be using the 102-89-7. If it's less than 50, you're going to be using 102-89-17. The same method you're going to be using for the permanent. If you have two projects that are strung together, in this case, your 50, I mean, like, you're going to be either less than 50 or more than 50. You can't have both. For the contact information regarding 600, please give me a call at area code, or this is my phone number and my email. And if you are in the construction office, Stephanie Maxwell, she's the person who handles the maintenance of traffic. Any questions?